When I first started giving things away, I thought this was going to be a story about decluttering. Tidier drawers, simpler mornings. What I didn't expect is that letting go of my stuff would end up teaching me more about trusting God than almost anything else in my life. And it started with the dumbest possible thing, a gravy bowl. Hey, I'm Steph. I used to have a house full of stuff, and I was holding on tight to control over pretty much everything, my space, my plans, and my future. Now I live in this tiny home on wheels, learning what it looks like to simplify, get healthy, and actually let God lead instead. I've introduced you to that story, and I've shown you the van. Today I want to go straight at the faith piece, because minimalism ended up teaching me lessons about trusting God I never expected when I started. When you own a house full of stuff, there's this quiet sense of safety in it. A closet full of options for every possible situation. A garage full of just in case. A pantry stocked for 6 months. I didn't realize how much of my sense of security was actually tied up in having enough stuff to handle whatever came, until I started giving it away. The one that got me? My gravy bowl. This sweet little dish that I probably use twice a year, when a coffee cup would have done the exact same job. And then there was my cherry pitter. One job, one season, and it sat in a drawer the other 11 months, taking up space I didn't have anymore. Letting go of things like that felt almost silly to be worried about. They're just kitchen tools. But that's exactly what stopped me. If I couldn't let go of a gravy bowl, what did that say about how tightly I was holding on to everything else? That's where minimalism stopped being about my kitchen and started being about trust. Learning that I don't need 3 ways to do one job, I just need enough. And underneath that, learning that God would give me enough. Every box I gave away ended up being a small test. Did I actually trust God to provide what I needed later, or did I need to keep proving to myself that I could provide it on my own? Most days I didn't love the answer. And it wasn't just physical stuff either. I noticed the same instinct in how I held onto plans. Backup plans and backup plans for the backup plans. Minimalism started in my closet, but it didn't stay there. It kept working its way into every corner of my life, where I'd quietly been trying to control the outcome instead of trusting God with it. There's a story in Exodus about manna, the bread God provided for the Israelites in the wilderness. They could only gather enough for one day. If they tried to stockpile extra for tomorrow, it spoiled overnight. I used to read that story and think it was about following the rules. Now I think it was about trust. God wasn't just feeding them. He was retraining an entire generation out of the hoarding instinct that comes from fear, one day at a time. Living in 200 square feet does something similar to me on a much smaller scale. I can't stockpile much of anything in here. I have to trust that when I need something, I'll be able to get it, or that I actually didn't need it as badly as I thought I did. It's a small physical version of learning to ask for today's bread instead of hoarding enough for next year. I think most of us do some version of hoarding, even outside of stuff. We hoard information so we feel prepared for anything. We hoard control over our schedules so nothing catches us off guard. None of that is essentially wrong, but I've started to notice how much of it comes from the same place the pantry full of extra food came from. Not trust, fear, dressed up as responsibility. The other thing minimalism exposed in me was how much of my identity used to be quietly built on what I owned. The house said something about who I was. The stuff in it said something too. When all of that got stripped away, I had to figure out who I actually was underneath it. On closing day, I did one last walkthrough. I ended up standing in my office, The room where I'd spent so much time, completely empty, no desk, no bookshelves, nothing on the walls. The light was still coming through the windows, the same way it always had, but everything else was gone, and my footsteps echoed off the bare floor. I'd stood in that room 100 times before, but it had always been full of stuff, full of work, full of decisions, full of whatever I thought that room said about who I was. Standing there empty, it hit me. I wasn't looking at my office anymore. I was looking at the outline of who I used to be. And I remember thinking, if this room doesn't say anything about me anymore, what does? What I found was underneath the house, the stuff, and the version of myself I'd built out of both of those things. The identity that was actually still standing was the one God gave me, not what I owned, not what I'd built, just His. Quick pause. If this is resonating, go ahead and hit subscribe, because next I'm getting really honest about what I'm still working through in all of this. I want to be honest that none of what I just said means I've got this fully figured out. If anything, minimalism has shown me exactly how much further I have to go. There are still things I hold on to longer than I probably should, out of the same fear dressed up as practicality. The one I keep catching myself on is my shoes. I'll tell you all about capsule wardrobes and needing less, and then I'll find myself scrolling, convinced I need just the right pair for some specific outfit or occasion. Like anyone is actually going to notice, let alone care, whether my shoes match perfectly. Nobody is. I know that, and I still catch myself wanting them. I notice it. I usually know exactly what's happening in the moment, and I still do it anyway. I don't think that makes the last 10 minutes untrue. I think it just makes it a process instead of a finish line. Changed isn't that I've stopped struggling with this. It's that I recognize the struggle faster now than I used to. A few years ago, I could go weeks without noticing I was quietly hoarding something. Control, comfort, a backup plan for my backup plan. Because I never had to look at it directly. Living small doesn't eliminate that instinct in me. It just makes it a lot harder to hide from, which honestly, I've come to be grateful for, even on the days when it's uncomfortable. I also want to say this clearly because I think it gets lost sometimes in conversations about minimalism and faith. This isn't about achieving some spiritual gold star for owning less. Plenty of people live in small spaces and never think about God once. And plenty of people also live in huge houses full of stuff and trust Him completely. The size of the space was never really the point for me. It was just the tool God used to get my attention, because I don't think I would have looked at any of this quite as honestly if I hadn't been forced to. So if you're in a season where you're being asked to let go of something, space, stuff, a plan, an expectation, and it feels less like freedom and more like loss right now, I just say this: that's normal, and it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Sometimes the letting go feels like grief before it ever feels like freedom. Here's what I've come to believe about all of this. I don't think God cares whether you live in a house or a van. That was never really the point. I think He cares whether the stuff you own has quietly become the thing you trust instead of Him. For me, minimalism was the tool that exposed that. Because when you take away the option to hoard, you're left with the choice. Trust God with what's actually in front of you today, or spend all your energy trying to build back the safety net you gave up. I'm still choosing the first one most days. Some days I choose it better than others. I don't think you need a van to learn this lesson. I just think a van made it impossible to avoid. If you've got a house full of just in case, you can go years without ever being forced to ask whether you actually trust God or just trust your own stockpile. Living small took that option away from me a lot faster than I would have chosen on my own. These days, that lesson shows up in small ways more than big dramatic ones. It's not stockpiling more groceries than I needed this week. It's not holding on to something out of fear I might need it someday instead of actually needing it now. It's trusting that if I give away the extra and it turns out I really did need it, God's not going to leave me stranded. That's a much smaller, quieter kind of faith than the big leaps people usually talk about. But I think it's the kind that actually gets built day by day, the same way the manna did. If any part of this resonates with you, whether you live in a van or a 5-bedroom house, I'd love to hear in the comments what letting go of something has taught you about trusting God. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe because I don't want you to miss anything. There's also a link in the description if you want to join my email list or go deeper with me on my blog. Until next time, live simply, grow strong, and stay rooted.